Welcome back to the Dataliction Podcast. We're so grateful to have you here again, and maybe for the first time. We know tons of you are tuning in every week, sometimes multiple times a week with our Essentials episodes, a little shorter. But I'm so grateful to be able to be a learner who helps others learn here at Dataliction. We love taking data and turning it into action, and not just any action, the right actions that help you to grow on purpose. Today's episode is all about smarter ways to scale past $100 million. We're going to have a great guest on to help us learn all about what it really takes to scale to that 100 million mark and plus. I mean, it is statistically so difficult, but I'm really grateful to look about the diagnostic frameworks, go-to-market alignment, AI-driven enablement, and so much more. This conversation is aimed to help us unpack how to move away from that kind of founder-driven intuition to really scalable commercial systems. And if you're wondering who's talking, this is John over here on the Dataliction team. And as always, I am joined with
Travis.
Oh, and this is an incredible time today, but we're doing something different. We're actually on different computers and we're in different actually countries. You're going to find out a little bit from our guest. Normally you see me and Travis sitting down next to each other, but we're in different studios and this is a really exciting time to have Ray de Silva here with us. I cannot wait for you to learn more about him, even just since I've got a chance to meet him. This is going to be a great conversation. Travis, you actually found our guest today, and I'm just going to give you a moment to share why you're having us, spend a whole episode learning from Ray, and then you can go ahead and introduce him.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. Well, so Ray and I got connected from a workshop, or it was like a meeting with Pavilion. That is another go-to-market type of collaboration that is out there we're part of. And we got to talking, and I threw out the question. And because we're all a bunch of leaders out here, and I said, tell me, what are some of the quick wins, or what was the main driving force in order to grow a company to 100 million? And I had some great feedback. Ray was one of those. Ray gave me some great insight. Me and him have been meeting separately ever since then, just to pick his brain on that growth strategy. He's been doing this for multiple companies and has now gone out on his own. So Ray, love for you to introduce yourself. It's been an honor to get to know you and your journey, but I'd love to hear from your own mouth what what led you to jump off to your new adventure.
Wow. Travis, John, that was an incredible intro. I listen to these podcasts with like AJ and so on Pavilion, and I just think, wow, the intros they give are amazing. But that was like jumping onto a stage on fire through a hoop, from 1,000 feet, so thank you so much for that introduction. That was truly incredible. And I have to say, Pavilion is the hub of where you meet great people. For me as a go-to-market leader, it is truly my people. So it's no surprise in one way that we've ended up connecting through that, because we have some great conversations there. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come and sort of chat through some of the things that I've had my fingers in, and various different pies and opportunities and relationships I've built with founders over the years. My background actually is in telecommunications. I first set up my first business in New Zealand some 25 odd years ago, and rode the wave of digital and 3G networks, 4G networks, and so on, and ended up in the UK working, funnily enough, for Vodafone. So my background was actually in building partnership opportunities with people like Google and Apple and Microsoft, and turning a very clunky kind of telco focused world into more of an internet space. And since then, I've gone on to be a fractional leader, essentially working for lots of different early and growth stage businesses, typically in the sort of B2B space. Mm-hmm. But what I love about fractional leadership is the ability to work with lots of different domains, to really get under the skin of what drives an industry or a vertical, and ask simple questions like, so why do we do it this way? And what if we did it this way? So, and more recently, and this is why I think we're probably very much in tune, I've been in the world of data, machine learning, analytics, and now AI. And if you're not talking AI competently these days, you're pretty much left on the side of the road,
You sure are.
roadkill, as we say. So, yeah, so great to be here and very happy to share on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ray. I'm glad you mentioned AI because we do have tons of people that are always looking for that buzzword.
Mhm.
Looking forward to diving into that in just a little bit here. But just foundationally, there are a couple of things you said right out of the gate that I want to dive into. First, you mentioned that you are in multiple industries and areas, yet the principles of growth you're applying across the board, which is fascinating because I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, if you're going to be in this industry, you grow this way. If you're in this industry, you grow this way. But what I'm hearing from you right from the beginning is that oftentimes companies are misdiagnosing their growth problems. And so, what are you looking for to help founders kind of break through that plateau? Why are they misdiagnosing problems? Maybe what are those misdiagnosed issues? And what is that, general framework to really
Mm.
break through?
Mm. That's a great question, John. And I think I can relate the kind of frustration that I find with founders to one founder I worked with recently. And he said very simply, look, he built, part of his business was building physical products. He said, look, I know every single piece of equipment, every single process and step that goes into the making of this particular product. He said, but when I sit down with my salespeople and my sales team and marketing, I haven't the faintest clue why it's not working, right? Please help me understand the system. And luckily for him, he was a founder that just openly admitted he didn't get it. He didn't understand the nuances of why sales fluctuated so dramatically from one month to the other. And so unpicking that, and you mentioned that kind of diagnosis piece, that is what I've been spending a lot of time with founders and other fractional leaders too. Actually, I just come from a function last night with the ScaleWise team led by Tom, and this is a topic on everybody's lips at the moment. Is just how do you really use AI to get into that kind of root cause analysis when you are trying to help a founder who's struggling to see through, the forest for the trees. They're struggling to really understand the components of that system that aren't working, because all they see at the end of the day is, often it's symptoms, right, that take the focus. And it's a case of, well, I mean, a common symptom is we need more pipeline, right? We're just not getting enough pipeline. Marketing aren't giving us enough leads. The salespeople aren't following up on enough of these leads or whatever. And often that turns into we've got a conversion issue, or we've got a messaging issue, or we've got an ICP issue. These are all fundamental structural issues with the system. They're not necessarily a lack of pipeline. One client that I recently worked with, essentially they were having a hugely variable results from quarter to quarter, and they were trying to understand why. So the founder's question was, look, please help me understand what are the real causes for my hugely variable sales. Because when we do get in front of clients, they are, generally speaking, they will buy within a very short space of time. So it came down to the fact that, the root cause diagnosis that we discovered was the fact that they didn't have any systemic way or systematic way of making sure that the salespeople were prepped for each call, that the client was ready to have the conversation. And the difference between this top salesperson and the rest of the team was that they were effectively doing this. They had the information ready. For example, you had to have some statistics on the client's traffic flows and permitting options and so on. But they had that worked out so that when they got on that call with the client, and they followed the client up to make sure that they did get on that call and the time was convenient and so on. And we figured all this out by doing lots and lots of call analysis, having interviews with reps and sales managers and so on. But it wasn't the initial biased view that the sales team leader and the founder actually had in mind in terms of what the real problem was. So they were too busy looking at symptoms and not enough the underlying root cause issues.
Would you say that there is a difference between tactical and structural gaps? And then between the tactical and structural, um, what would you say is more important to really be identifying? I heard you say the word structural a little bit more, but then you did mention a couple tactical elements. So how do you balance the difference between those two? And maybe even how do you define them? But then how do you weight them when you're first approaching this, diagnosing of the real problems?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point to nail straight off the bat is what's the difference between tactical and structural issues? And I think, my perspective on this is tactical is more about coaching, managing objections, understanding how to improve the perception of your message from your pitch decks, and understanding how to make sure you get a better flow in terms of doing a demonstration. Structural gaps are things like, look, you've just got the wrong ICP. You are just fundamentally targeting the wrong segment of customers. You don't have a good handoff from one team to the other, or you just don't have the right incentives in play for each of the team members that's working on a particular opportunity. There's misalignment. So for me, I guess an analogy is, you don't fix a broken bone with painkillers. You've fundamentally got to reset the bone before it's possible to heal, right? And the tactical really helps in the moment. Having a structural approach to the diagnostic and diagnosing the problems, much like any doctor would diagnose a patient for any particular ailment, is the key here. So a consistent, thoughtful methodology, and that's really what, if you can get that right as a subject matter expert, then it becomes common practice and you get the kind of consistency and accuracy at addressing these issues that's just not possible otherwise.
Can you lean in a little bit? Like I love what you're saying. You're kind of using AI, kind of the root cause analysis that you were talking about the other night. Can you dive in a little bit more to what you mean by that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things is anybody can use something like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever, and they can throw a bunch of information in there. And actually, in most cases, that large language model AI capability, and by the way, I have a pet peeve here. I hate that people say AI is ChatGPT. That's what AI is, because as a machine learning and data and AI practitioner, and yourself's probably laughing in the background here, is that that is not AI. There are literally millions of different use cases for AI. A large language model is one of them, but it's garnered everybody's attention and perception right now. So just having that ability to actually understand that throwing data at an AI tool isn't going to get you necessarily a great result, but you can certainly do it. Yes. You can feed a bunch of stuff into ChatGPT and it'll give you an answer. Of course it hallucinates, but that's because of context. One of the most important things with doing any kind of AI based diagnostic is context. And context engineering is really about saying, in the context of this company, in this market, with this product, with this competitor, with this sales process, doing these things, what's going wrong? Knowing what to look for as well as the other thing is that when you have mapped out the whole revenue cycle, you understand exactly, the main points of potential failure in that system. So you know where to look. And if you can train an AI model to be able to say, in the context of this particular situation, look at these things and find these particular characteristics, or find what's missing. The other component of a successful AI-powered diagnostic is the subject matter expertise. For example, with Dana, my partner has developed a fantastic cultural-based assessment. It's called the Champions Code. And Victor's developed this after, decades of experience working with salespeople and transforming sales organizations. And when you include that in the context analysis, you can start to see where the organization has structural capability gaps, where people are being hired into teams that are, you've got a real massive gap in terms of performance between the top performers and the bottom performers. People are coming and going all the time. You've got disparate functional teams that are not necessarily well connected. There's lots of silos going on. So when it comes to understanding capabilities and culture, the ability to include that kind of cultural and capability assessment within a diagnostic is absolutely key. So essentially, a successful diagnostic relies on not only the simple principle of the right data in, the right data out,
Yeah.
but it's a matter of tuning the capability of that model, which has been trained on a base of data, to retrain it on the right problem, the right data set. Because we all know that garbage in equals garbage out. So a successful AI diagnostic really is about fine tuning and about accuracy. And we think that actually it's possible to get to a very, very high level of accuracy if you you engineer the process correctly. You're looking at the right data, you're getting it consistently in the right format. You know, this is music to your ears, of course, because this is what you do for clients. The right data in, you get better decisions. You also get a model that then is able to more rapidly and far more accurately interpret a much broader, deeper range of the right information in order to get much greater accuracy on a more consistent basis.
Hmm. Man, Ray, you've been throwing a lot of really great information. I'm learning so much. And so let me take one step back here. And I'm trying to, you've got it to where the organizations are saying we want to adopt it. How do you work with organizations to get them even to that stage? Because now you've got them to where like, okay, yes, we're going to take our database and we're going to run it through a certain, whether maybe a model or a prompting that you've got your engine all created around. How do you get them before then? Because what we see is, I've got leadership teams who are like, yeah, we need to do something, but I don't know what it is. And then you got half the team saying, well, it's going to take over the world and we're back at square one. How do you get the teams on board there?
Yeah, great question. How do you get the teams on board? Well, first of all, it starts from what's the momentum that's driving the need, and a lot of the time the problem is organizations just don't know what their AI strategy should be. They're approaching it from hey, we need a platform to fix this problem, and they're coming at it from a symptom perspective. The right way to get people on board is to really say, okay, fundamentally, what's broken? And let's start with that before we start thinking about the solutions, before we start throwing platforms at it. In my experience, about, I would say, at least half, if not more of the time in working with clients, it is not a platform that will fix the problem. It is understanding that there are structural, systemic issues where the system is not there in the first place. For example, there isn't a very good handoff between sales and customer success. Classic case is, they're viewed as two very disparate teams and they do not have consistent aligned KPIs. One client that I was working for on a full-time basis, I actually built this team. I hate the term tiger team, but in reality, it was the tiger team of kind of a combination of strategic, project focused people and pre-sales delivery engineers, where they could actually come in as soon as we had a sales qualified lead and actually build a hypothesis with the client around what the right things to do were based on the problem that they were trying to solve. And that formed the fabric of the project alignment throughout the duration of what we were doing for that client. And there was no surprises when it came to the delivery with the CEO to say, this is what we found, this is what we've done, because they all aligned with what was agreed by the client at the very outset of the project. So I think, how do you get people to see the need for it? Well, evidence, right, at the end of the day, is the most powerful conversation. And I have that with, my role as a fractional leader. Switched on Kiwi is essentially a fractional CRO business. So I work with lots of different companies. And the reality is the issue stems from, we haven't really looked at what the problem is. And my opinion is based on my experience. And without evidence-based intelligence, which you typically don't get right at the very start of an engagement working with a client, it's not until well down the line that you actually get this. And I'm sure you find the same working with your clients, that you can really then start to say, okay, well, here's where the problem is. So wrapping all this up, it's the ability to get under the hood quickly, to establish where the issues are, to have a hard evidence base of information, and combine that with a good solid sense of knowing what to look at first and why. And that's how you get your team on board, is to sit down and say, here are the things that will make the biggest difference, and these are the facts, and remove the bias from the conversation. Because one of the biggest challenges is working with certainly early and growth stage founders is there's a huge amount of bias involved. So removing that really, really helps. And then you get everybody on board much sooner, much quicker. But there can be some pains involved in that. People have very strong opinions, especially at the senior leadership level. And they often don't like to be told they're wrong. So there's a nuance to doing this the right way.
Ray, you've mentioned that you want to get into a diagnostic space before you throw a platform at the problems that you've been seeing. And I think a lot of times people will presume automation can fix everything. One of the things I'm hearing resounding in all of your commentary here is that revenue is a system, revenue is a structure. It's not all of these different little teams doing their own little things. So then as you are diagnosing, you're building a better structure. I'm seeing two paths here of both trimming away things that might be getting in the way, and then also bridging the gap between these siloed teams to make sure everyone understands how their role impacts the next, which gives us the context we can put into AI, and we can then begin to automate better. That said, that's a big task. So, what do you prioritize first in these go-to-market systems and structures when you say, hey, we can use AI to help us find some problems and maybe even do some automation, but we're going to first build these things structurally. But you have 4 different little teams that are all doing their own thing. What is the thing that founders, other than removing their biases, what do they need to be willing to keep their hands open to, and what is it okay to hold on to? I mean, I just consistently see founders hanging on too tight. Well, what's your advice here? And, why is AI not the magic pill?
Wow. That's a big question, John. I mean, I think some of the challenge here, you're right, is that there is a strong degree of bias that with some founders, they're very wedded to a specific idea. The smart ones are the ones that want to learn, right? So I feel like, putting yourself in a position working for a founder or CEO that really isn't open to ideas, and they're just very fixated on achieving a specific outcome, is already a bit of a red flag. So I think, working with clients that are open to wanting to learn, develop, and to really grow in terms of their understanding of what's not working and how to improvement, I think that's one of those kind of like hygiene things that you just learn over time to make sure that you're paying attention to. But I think, back to your question, it really does come down to, in the diagnostic process that I use with clients, it's having a different set of lenses for the different functional areas is the first thing that we do. So sales is a functional area, marketing is a functional area, customer success, another functional area, products, another one we'll add in the near future. And then there's really 3 types of analysis that we'll look at. There's the calls that go on, right? Yes, of course, you can open up Gong and look at a bunch of transcripts and so on. But yeah, funnily enough, I was last night, I was having a conversation with the fractional CMO, and he said, look, one of the challenges was that a bunch of these closed, lost deals were just being flagged with this generic, didn't fit, reason code. So his suspicion was, which was strongly confirmed, was that, there was a bunch of other things that were actually the real reasons for why those deals were being closed, lost. So he actually went back and literally looked through all the Gong calls to try and find what the real reason was. Now, we could have done that at probably a 90% efficiency level and looked at all of those calls, because we know what we're looking for. We're looking for example, in the qualification process, we're looking for on a SPICE basis, we're looking at the SPICE methodology, and did the person prove out that, what that critical event, for example, was missing. So the emphasis was not on making a decision quickly because they couldn't see the impact of not making the decision. So the deal was lost, whatever. Being able to do that for 1,000 calls, we could have had the conversation the next day basically and said, hey, look, we've gone back and looked at all these calls, and actually the real reason these deals closed because they were poorly qualified. They closed lost. They weren't actually real deals. They should never have been in the pipeline. We shouldn't have been focusing on them in the first place. So again, it comes back to the approach. It's through a functional approach first. We suspect we've got a problem. This is what I hear often. We suspect we've got a problem with marketing. We think it's this, but actually when you break it down and you've done a diagnostic for each of the functional areas, because they're all interconnected, because it is systemic, often it falls that there's like a specific critical point in the sales process, which is being missed, which is leading to poor qualification, for example, which is leading to delays and, longer deal cycles and longer close times and a higher percentage of close lost and so on and so on. So I think it's having the right set of eyes and ears for the functional area you're looking at, knowing what to look for, and really, we talk about prompting, but it's really about contextual engineering in terms of helping the tools to actually work better in terms of what you need from an output perspective.
Amazing.
You mentioned SPICE. Can you lean in on that acronym for us?
I mean, SPICE is one of the qualification methodologies. Others are MEDIC, MEDPIC, BANT, you name it. Everyone has their favorite. And I think it's the ability to be able to, at speed, take those same calls and run them through a selection of different qualification methodologies to be able to spot the differences. For example, if someone is a fan of BANT, then anybody listening to this can Google this on the internet. They'll find a bunch of information far better than I can explain it in 10 seconds. They'll find that ultimately it's a different flavor and some of the nuances are missing. So when you can look for specific nuances at speed with across hundreds or thousands of conversations with customers, you think about those initial discovery calls, you think about the demonstrations, you start to look for, a tone of voice and the voice of the customer. Often when we analyze these calls, and this goes back to your question earlier, John, is, how do you start? Where do you start and how do you set this up? It's through listening to these calls and knowing what to look for, you start to see a pattern. Patterns that humans wouldn't see, without a great deal of time and effort. For example, being able to spot that there just was no critical event. SPICE, the CE in SPICE represents critical event. Being able to spot that there was no critical event in a large percentage of the demonstration or the discovery calls, it is a really key revelation, because then you can sit down and you can say, right, this is not a structural issue, right? This is an issue that better sales enablement or better training will really fix. And actually, I came across another founder just recently. We happened to be sitting in the Soho House in London, right next to the guy that I needed to introduce him to. Randomly, he was sitting at the next table. He's developing a micro-based sales learning platform that works on Salesforce that literally at the right moment can give that salesperson the insight into making that change in conversation to ask that question that they haven't yet to qualify that particular piece of information. And I thought that was fascinating. So we're really getting into the point where, there are these tactical fixes to a lot of the root cause issues. But if you don't know that your qualification is not to the standard that you really need it to be, whatever qualification framework you're using, then it's very hard to know that needs to be fixed. I mean, in one client's impact, we estimated that improving the show rate by having an automated process of just reaching out to the client, 24 hours before, clarifying what they needed to bring to the call. Just that one little piece of automation. And, this is not rocket science. It's not a platform. It was just an extra little step. Put an additional $2 million of revenue on their books. So, had an ROI of 100 times, the cost of delivering that. So it was, no, 1,000 times, sorry. And it's when you add these things up that actually you start to see massive changes. So, one of the examples I use with clients is that at 7 key moments across the sales process or the revenue cycle, if you were to make a small incremental change of just 10%, then you will be more than doubling your revenue from the same amount of business, right? No funnel filling issues, purely looking at how to optimize that process. And, when you start to think about it that way, that's an enormous impact. So that's one of the mindsets that we have in mind whenever we work with a client.
Ray, this has been amazing. And I want to give you a chance to wrap us up with some final thoughts around maybe the most underrated first step or two that these founders, these companies that want to get past that 100 million mark, they've been around for a while, they're healthy, they're maybe at 30, 40 million, but that's a big gap to get up to that 100 million. What are the top 2 most underrated next steps you'd recommend for them to take in terms of looking at structure, looking at AI, and all of that?
Yeah. Again, it's, be brave, and to have a better understanding of where things are working well and where things are not working so well. The things that are working well, obviously, you want to double down on, and you want to be very careful in terms of the way that you allocate funds. But my blueprint for scaling effectively is it's about diagnose, align, enable, and optimize. It very much is a systemic approach, but one of the key factors that I would recommend any client to look at is once you understand what's going on under the hood better, to look at everything in a measured way that you can say, well, there's always 1,000 things I could do. What are the top 3 things that would fundamentally shift the needle this quarter, next quarter, the following quarter? And to actually have a really solid look at the return on investment for each of those, what we would call interventions. There's really not much point in, as the saying goes, arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You want to be addressing the fundamental issue. If the ship is sinking, you want to stop that water, flooding those compartments. So it's a terrible example. I know we're talking about successful companies here growing, but you've got to pick it apart. It's often not just about adding bodies. It's about making sure that your system is scalable. So if, let's take a motor car, for example. You take a key piece out of a Porsche engine, the whole thing's going to stop, right? Chances are, if it's a fundamental component, then, you're going to end up ruining that car and wrecking it. So it's about understanding the role of each piece in that machinery, much like the client who was frustrated that he could clearly diagnose the factory and every part and component and process, but he couldn't understand why sales didn't work some months from month to month. It's very much about understanding each piece of that system and optimizing it. So you've got operations where you need to have systems and data. You need to have enablement where you're equipping people with context and tools. You need training. So, you're building capability in your people. And AI it's a funny thing. It's an amplifier. If you amplify a terrible sound, you're going to get lots more of terrible sound. If you're amplifying something that sounds great, people enjoy it. So it accelerates clarity, but only where the foundations are solid. And I think that no matter whether you're a 40, 50, $100 million organization, there will always be a section of your system which is not performing well. So it's about finding what that is, figuring out the value of getting it improved, and then focusing and doubling down on those things. And lastly, don't be afraid to course correct. Everyone has a hypothesis, all right? and valuable experience and perspectives. And I've always said that having a more diverse team helps bring a diversity of perspectives, which can often be used to solve much more complex problems. But it really comes down to the ability to have that clarity at an executive level and just not be afraid to say, hey, this is what we thought, this is what happened, we need to make a course correction, and for there to be transparency and honesty at that level. Without that, it becomes very challenging. So, and that's pretty much it, I think, at the end of the day.
Ray, thank you so much for the wisdom you have given to me and Travis and all of our listeners. I have zero doubts that people will want to learn more about you, Ray, and get connected with you and everything you're doing. What are the best next steps for those people to find you and get involved?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is to jump on LinkedIn and just type in Ray de Silva. That's Ray Desilva, and feel free to connect. I'd love to hear from anybody in the audience that wants to learn more. Yeah, would just love to carry the conversation on. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you again, Ray. Travis, AI is an amplifier, not just some extra platform to throw at problems. Travis, any thing that you really want to leave our listeners with just to kind of finish up our episode today?
Yeah, Ray, thank you so much for being on today. It's been a real pleasure. I've taken copious amounts of notes here. I love that, don't be afraid to course correct. I know that there's a lot of times that we try, new systems out and it just doesn't work. And we're just throwing good money after bad. And I just love that AI as an amplifier. Oh, yeah. As I think about data, you putting bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. And just like with AI, if you don't have all your systems in place, it's not going to be going well. And it's really about people. I love the fact that you're talking about cars and engines. And if you take one little component out, it might be the best car in the world, but it still won't run properly if you take, a certain component out of it. So really appreciate it. These have been some really good, valuable lessons. Really appreciate you, Ray.
Yeah, this is awesome. For all of you who are still listening here to the end of this episode, you owe me, Travis, and Ray 5 stars on the podcast. So please make sure to like, share, subscribe, give us some comments and ratings, and let us know. You can DM us, you can email us on our website of what you want to learn about. But between now and the next time that we meet, we hope you continue to take your data, turn it into action, and that action into growth.